And we are in the middle of chapter 4, which is discussing ordeal and miracle, really essentially the challenges that we all go through. Just to share a very brief idea before we see that the Sefer of Shemot, which we recently started, is a very different sort of journey or different experience from Sefer Bereshit. Because Bereshit is very much a story of family, right? It's mishpacha. It's the Avinu family, right? Avraham Avinu, his son Yitzchak Avinu, Yaakov Avinu, and then you move over to Shemot, and it becomes not the story of family, but becomes the story of of a nation, of a people. And I think the sort of transition or the thing which signifies or symbolizes that transition is moving from that individual challenge that, you go through Bereishit is full of the challenges and ordeals of Abraham and his 10 tests, and Yitzchak and his challenges of the binding of Isaac, and Yaakov and Yosef, and like it's replete with challenges. But those are individual challenges. And then we move on to the story of Shemot, which is the story of a national ordeal, and that really is what binds and bonds and transforms a family into a people through that collective challenge and the growth that comes through that collective challenge. Um, we were just leaving off with a discussion about David Hamelech. We were on page 46. David HaMelech, King David, who was said to be the almost the fourth wheel of the chariot of the Merkava, the chariot of Hashem, whatever that means. But sort of on par with Abraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov, but he wasn't quite there yet. He asked Hashem. He says, "No, we say Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov, the God of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Why do we say Elokei David? Why am I not on that? What's lacking? Why can the name not be attached to me?" And Hashem responded, "Because I challenged Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. They had tests, and you haven't had a test." And there's we're about to read over here now about what it is about the test which elevates a person. The miracle, the miraculous effect of what a test is. If you remember last week, we mentioned how nisayon, test, is also the same word as nes, which is miracle. So what do they have in common? Middle of page 46. A name is a revelation of essence, right? So Hashem wanted, he said, test me because I want the name of Hashem to be attached to me. So what does that mean? So a name is a revelation of essence. If a person's name, revealing his essence, is spoken together with Hashem's name, the idea is that an aspect of Hashem's presence is revealed in that person. That individual has somehow become a vehicle for Hashem's manifestation in the world. So when Avraham Avinu is tested in the fire of the Akedah, binding and sacrificing Yitzchak, Hashem is revealed. How does this happen? The answer is that a real test is actually impossible. We mentioned, remember, the test is revealing that latent potential. There's potential, but it's still sort of latent. It hasn't been actualized yet. But a real test is actually impossible. It stresses a person beyond all possible limits. The feeling of the enormity of a real ordeal is accurate. This test is too much for me. When a person faces the impossible chasm and leaps anyway because Hashem asks it and miraculously arrives at the other side, Hashem is revealed because only He can do the impossible. That is a miracle. The banner of miracle, of divine immanence, has been raised. Two elements are required: to attach oneself to the divine and then to leap. And essentially, we understand that a test, anytime that we have a test, that we've got a knee-jerk reaction, right? We've got the natural state, and the natural state is, give me a break, man.
Impossible.
I want to relax. Right, the reality of physicality is gravity, right? We're all drawn down, so we're drawn to the lowest possible point. So to rise above that is in effect a miraculous thing of being able to rise above physicality. The two elements are required: to attach oneself to divine and then to leap. The sages tell us that a person's own lower self, the Yetzer Hara, attacks him daily with lethal viciousness. And if Hashem does not help, one cannot overcome it. If there are no inaccuracies in the statements of our sages, if they tell us that without divine assistance, siyata dishmaya, the battle is impossible, then it must be. So that to perceive victory in ordeal is to perceive the divine hand. When a person acts beyond the level of normal, expected human action, Hashem is revealed. The Gemara records that Shimon ben Shetach, the great scholar and sage, once bought a donkey from a Gentile and discovered a precious jewel attached to it. He returned the jewel to its owner, explaining that he had paid for a donkey, not a jewel. The Gentile exclaimed, Baruch Elokei Shimon ben Shetach. Blessed is the God of Shimon ben Shetach. That response so clearly expresses exactly what we've learned. Not blessed is Shimon ben Shetach, but blessed is the God of Shimon ben Shetach. Hashem's name together with his. The Gentile appreciated immediately that when a human acts against human nature, he is expressing a connection with a higher reality. A small miracle has occurred. When I was living in Boston, Massachusetts, in America, that was a completely different accent. But when I was living over there, it gets very cold in the winter. I remember I was walking to shul, or walking back from shul, whatever it was, and I saw an old lady. There was one bitty old lady who was trying to schlep her shopping in the freezing cold and the thing. So I offered, it was cold. I was sort of rushing and it was raining or something, and I stopped and I offered her a hand. I mean, I think anyone would, but evidently not everyone would, because there she was schlepping it herself with all the other people walking past. And you know what? She turned around and she said to me, "Thank you, son. You're a God-fearing man." Interesting, no? As in, where does that come from? As in, you've got to be attuned to it yourself. But this person clearly realized that there's an aspect, there's a facet um, of revelation of the divine in overcoming that which is challenging. We see this in many ways. The Mesilas Yesharim, when dealing with the higher levels which a person can reach, says, "Techilasoi avoda v'soifoi gemul." The beginning is work, but the end is a gift. This, by the way, is when the Mesilas Yesharim, the path of the just, if anyone knows, it's talking about the different levels of service of Hashem. And this level is the level of Kedusha. Kedusha means holiness. Yeah, but we say, very interesting, I mean, holiness sounds a little bit, I mean, about maybe on your level, but a bit above my level. Holy, like, oh, you're a holy man. I don't know, holy person, holy deeds. But we actually say that. We say Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivot. Right? We there's a certain level of kedusha, of holiness, and holiness is like divine spirituality. But it starts, we're told, and the Mesilas Yesharim says that it's got two parts. The first of it is you've got to do something, and then the rest of it is divine. That happens from above. But first, you've got to have that internal inspiration that sort of raises you up, and then the heavenly claw comes up, and those claw games, come and grabs you and schleps you up. The beginning of the path which leads to transcendence is hard work, very hard work, but the end is a gift. It comes from elsewhere, from beyond the work, beyond the self. The sages say that if a person states that he labored and found, Yogati umatsasi, I tried hard and I found it, then he is to be believed. Labor will lead to results. But the words are so potently clear. The word found connotes an unexpected find, a metzia. You go to it's almost like a bargain. A metzia is a bargain, right? Just like, wow. It doesn't say labored and achieved, but rather labored and found. The find was unexpected, a surprise, despite the work, because it so completely belongs to another dimension. You access reserves and energy stores that I didn't realize I could get there. I didn't realize I could access that before. The prayer of one who stands tested, therefore, is, Hashem, this test that you've given me seems impossible to me. I cannot humanly overcome it. But if you have seen fit to test me thus, I shall go through the impossible for you. I shall leap. I give myself to you. I acknowledge that I am nothing. You are everything. Help me through. A beautiful test. A beautiful test. That, if we can reframe that and bear that in mind, and have that in mind when we're facing an ordeal, when we're facing a challenge, ultimately realizing it, we can't. It's miraculous. It will be miraculous. But I put myself over to you, and Hashem, I'll do my little bit. Make my little step. Let us apply this idea. By the way, what time are we going until?
10
Excluding
past.
We go until 10 past and then we do 2 to
10
hit.
past 10. Great.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, we will endeavor to finish the chapter. Let us apply this idea. The Akedah, the binding of Yitzchak. The commentaries explain just how impossible Avram's test was. By the way, it's called Akedat Yitzchak as well. So at the same time, it was Avram's test, but we call it the Akedah, the binding of Yitzchak, because an element of it was also a test for Yitzchak. But so impossible for Avram's test was to sacrifice for a son for whom he had waited into extreme old age, from whom he foresaw the Jewish people descending after teaching the world that human sacrifice is wrong, a man whose entire personality was chesed and kindness and love, and not just to harm that son in some minor way, but to kill him with his own hand. Beyond the emotional level, the intellectual level was no less difficult. It made no sense. Hashem had promised him progeny. Good word. We don't have that in Cockney rhyming slang. Progeny from Yitzhak. How could there be a contradiction in the divine? But the mystical level expresses an even deeper problem. Avram knew that Hashem didn't actually want this sacrifice, as the verse states, "V'loi ulsa al libi," which I never intended. As one knows the mind of the beloved, and he was correct. In fact, ultimately, Hashem prevented him from carrying it out. So he had all levels of his consciousness crying out that this action couldn't be done. Yeah, again, on the first level is the fact that he'd been waiting all this time. He knew he stood for chesed, for kindness, yeah, and everything had been promised through his offspring, through Yitzchak, and even didn't more than that. He knew that Hashem didn't want him to actually do it in the end anyway. But nevertheless, Hashem said to him, in effect, yes, all that you feel and know is true, but do it anyway. That is a test. That is facing the impossible. And Avram proceeded to do the impossible. The result, the impossible occurred. The miraculous manifested. We are told in Chumash that Yitzchak was spared. He climbed down off the altar and a ram was offered in his stead. But, and this is the mind-blowing thing over here, we're told in the Medrash, Efrei shel Yitzchak munach lefanai. The ashes of Yitzchak lie before me. In a higher dimension, he was actually sacrificed. Not the ashes of the ram, but the ashes of Efrei shel Yitzchak. He became an Oila Tamima, pure burnt offering. The impossible paradox, a man who lives physically in this world, but spiritually he's in the next world simultaneously. And the qualities of father and son live on in the Jewish people. The ability to yield the emotions, the intellect, the entire personality to Hashem in Emunah. And the gift of being able to live in a physical world and transcend it at the very same time. They leave us the legacy of having to live this way, being forced by test after test to climb, to elevate the material to the spiritual and survive miraculously. So now we come back to David HaMelech. So what of David and Bathsheba? This was the test of David. The Gemara searches for an understanding of exactly where David sinned. The simple meaning of the words may be misleading. The Gemara states that there was no sin of adultery or any other lowly error which may be read into the words. In fact, Bathsheba was destined for him, and from them was born Shlomo, King Solomon, the direct forebearer of Mashiach. The conclusion of the Gemara is that David's error was that he asked to be tested. What was his sin? He asked for a test. This needs understanding. What's wrong with asking for a test? If the purpose of life is to be tested, why should we not actively seek ordeals? But the answer lies in the very question. When one asks for a test, one is asserting the confidence that one can succeed in the test. Tell me, I'll show you. No one asks for a test which he is certain to fail. And that confidence, that ego, that element of pride is just what Nisayon, or test, comes to neutralize, to eliminate. When David asked to be tested, he manifested an infinitesimal degree of pride at his supernal level. And the work which he is destined to do in the world is to show that he is nothing, that Hashem is everything. Leis leimen gigarme klum. Hashem carries us through. We act, but he accomplishes. For the man who is to teach us this most powerfully to the Jewish people and the world, even the smallest degree of asserting that he can do something independently of Hashem, as it were, is too much. Even though he had emptied himself of almost all vested interest, all ego, yet that tiny speck of pride was too much. And the only possible result, by the way, he probably knew that he was going to be able to overcome the test because Hashem would help him. He knew that. But still, that speck of pride. The solution, in fact, the only possible result, the solution, in fact, was actually to fail, because failure was the correction of the ego. So David's success was not yet to be David's success was not yet to be that fourth element of the divine chariot will be manifest, in fact, through him at the end of time. We learn an exhilarating depth here. Love Gavetat. I know you can even hear him saying the words, right? We learn an exhilarating depth. I haven't got the accent, but ordeal leads to transcendence. In the paradox of facing crisis with a lion's strength, and yet inwardly knowing that only Hashem manifests here, we reveal him openly. What is possible and what is impossible isn't our concern. The Altar of Kelm used to say, ask not if a thing is possible, ask only if it is necessary. Our concern is to rise to that partnership with the divine, which invites him, as it were, to reach down to us. And please God, we should be able to, if we're presented with the tests, to be able to overcome them, knowing that it's Hashem that helps us get through it, and thereby becoming so miraculously attached and revealing the divine, reveal the divine in our lives, reveal the divine in the world, and bring a beautiful light down to the world.